snap. The kick is in the air, and the kick this time is no, sir-ree. No, sir-ree. Final score, Tennessee 20, Florida 17. Pandemonium reigns.
You're listening to the RTI Podcast, powered by RockyTopInsider.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the RTI Podcast. I am Nathaniel Rutherford, the managing editor of RockyTopInsider.com, joined again by our staff writer here at RTI, and he's also the co-host and producer of the Swinament morning radio show, and that's, of course, Ben McKee. We appreciate you all tuning in to another episode this week. This is the second one we've done this week. We've also got a couple special things on the site for a podcast this week as well. We had an interview with Mike Gillespie, who covers the South Carolina Gamecocks for ABC Columbia. That should already be up by the time you're listening to this podcast, so if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, go check it out. I'll actually be referencing something from the interview a little bit later in this podcast as well. But we do appreciate all of you tuning in. If it's your first time listening, thank you so much. You can find us in a multitude of ways. You can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts. You can also, if you have an Android phone, you can download us, all the podcasts or whatever kind of podcaster app you use on your Android phone. And you can go to YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can check out the podcast that way too. And you can leave comments and stuff on there. A lot of you do that, so we appreciate you interacting with the podcast that way. And of course, RockyTopInsider.com is the main site. You can click on the podcast tab there, click on the page that this podcast is in, and listen to it straight from that webpage. Listen or watch the YouTube video / listen to it that way on the YouTube video that's embedded there, or you can download it from that webpage as well. Ben, we have a lot to cover. We're not going to get too much into recruiting stuff because we have the RTI and VR2 recruiting podcast for that, but I know you and I both are pretty pumped about five-star Jaden Springer coming into Tennessee and kind of what that, the implications of Tennessee's 2020 class and what that can mean for the basketball future. Basketball season is almost here. It's the exhibition game is less than a week away now. The actual regular season is just a little over a week away at this point. It's almost here, thank goodness. We're both big basketball fans, and I know Vol fans, obviously by ticket sales, are very pumped about basketball season this year too. But Tennessee football has a very big game on the schedule this weekend. This is a game for both Tennessee and South Carolina that I think it's a must-win for both schools. It's a game that if you lose, it really, really hurts your bowl chances. For Tennessee, obviously, it puts them in dire straits where they have to win out to even get to a bowl game because they'd be 2-6. For South Carolina, it would put them at 3-5, which would be the same record Tennessee would have if Tennessee wins. And then Carolina has, with 4 games left, they have a rough schedule. They should be able to beat Vanderbilt. They should be able to beat Appalachian State. But then they play A&M, and then they play Clemson. So you're looking at, they can get 2 more wins after this game probably, but getting that 6th win would be very difficult between the Aggies and the Tigers there. The big question for Tennessee this week, it's one that we were talking about in the podcast earlier this week. It's one that still doesn't have an answer. Where's Tennessee going to go at quarterback? It seems like Brian Maurer is going to be out. We weren't sure about that earlier this week. We kind of felt like it was a possibility. Now it seems almost like a foregone conclusion that Maurer, Pruitt said he's doubtful. He had the Instagram post on his story on Wednesday that he was at Vanderbilt Medical over in Nashville. Seems like and I think Pruitt even said on Vol calls, I think verbatim, that Maurer is not going to play this weekend. So he's out. Tennessee has yet to name a starting quarterback. I don't think they'll name one until right up in game time. You'll kind of see which quarterback's going with the first string offense on the field before warm-ups and things like that. What is your feeling of who's going to be Tennessee's starting quarterback for this game? I think it has to be. I wouldn't say it has to be, but I just feel like it's going to be JT Shrout because of things we covered in the podcast earlier this week about maybe the team's out on Garantano. I don't know that you can really feel great about putting him back out on the field after the way the Alabama game went. And I know, we don't really know a whole lot about JT Shrout, and I know that what we do know isn't super encouraging from the standpoint of, he's still very young. He's still learning how to play football. In practice, he doesn't do a great job of getting the offense lined up and getting them in position and making sure, there's not going to be false starts or anything like that. But at the same time, I mean, if the team is sold out of Garantano, I'm not saying they are, but if the locker room is, done, quote unquote, with Garantano, you don't have a choice. You can't put him out there and expect the team to play and to win a game with a guy who they don't respect or don't want to be out there. So my gut feeling is that, Ben, you'll see redshirt freshman JT Shrout make his first career start. What is your feeling on the situation?
No, I feel the same. I think we'll see JT Shrout as well. And I think I'm basing that based off of the comment that Pruitt made during his Wednesday press conference. And maybe I'm just looking into it too much, but Pruitt was asked about the quarterback situation and kind of is the plan still to evaluate the guys in practice this week and then make a decision on Saturday. And, Pruitt gave the typical coach speak answer for 90% of his response. And then towards the end, he said, JT Shrout, he's going to get a chance on Saturday. We'll see what he does with it. And, maybe that means that he's going to play two quarterbacks, or that they've made their mind up that they'll play both quarterbacks, or it means that Shrout is going to start. And I don't think that they're going to play two quarterbacks. Earlier in the year, he kind of played it off as Maurer and Shrout being somewhat equal, and not really knowing who would come in if one needed to come in for JG, and it ultimately resulted in Maurer going into the game. And then you kind of fast forward to after the Florida game, that bye week, and JG had played terrible to that point, and his job was in question. And leading into the Georgia game, it was a competition for the quarterback spot. It was JG hasn't been playing well. We've got this freshman. Do we throw him to the Wolves or not? That was kind of the public perception. And then everything that Pruitt was saying throughout Georgia week was that, we'll see what they do in practice, and then we'll judge on Saturday who starts. And then come Saturday, we'll probably play multiple guys. Well, they didn't play multiple guys. Pruitt kind of alluded to that during the week, but Maurer was definitely the starter for that game, and the only way that Maurer was going to come out was if he had a Nathan Peterman type moment, or if he got hurt. And what happened? He came out only because he got hurt in that football game when he was he came out twice. The first time it was on like a run play, and his elbow kind of went. We never actually got what the injury was after the game. We never found out. But he was shaken up for that play. JG had to come in. He completed a third down pass, and then Maurer ended up going back in. And then later on, the play that we all remember is the Georgia fumble recovery for a touchdown, in which Maurer was absolutely flattened on the play like a pancake, and he could not play the rest of the game. So I kind of think back to that situation and what Pruitt was saying going into the Georgia game in the sense of all three quarterbacks are going to get an opportunity. And, that's great coach speak, and I would have said the same thing if I was Coach Pruitt, but that didn't turn out to be true because Shrout never played, and then JG, he didn't go in unless Maurer got hurt. So maybe I'm looking into Pruitt's comments too much from Wednesday after practice saying that JT will get a shot on Saturday. We'll see how he does. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but based off, everything to this point, I find it hard to believe that he's going to go in with the intentions of playing a two-quarterback system. I don't think that would be good for either quarterback. JG needs to get into a rhythm. JT Shrout needs to get into a rhythm. So, again, for the third time, maybe I'm reading too much into that comment, but based off that, I think it'll be Shrout. And, there is some concern about him lining up correctly under center on the first play and making sure the rest of the offense is lined up, making sure that, a wide receiver isn't going in motion when a tight end is going in motion. That's an illegal shift, and that's a penalty. Even in the Alabama game, he had a delay of game because he didn't get the ball snapped in time. That's what's been plaguing him during practice. So there is some concern in that area. He has a great arm, but I think that if Tennessee can get the running game going and he doesn't turn the football over, I think that gives Tennessee a chance to win. And, based off the way that JG has played, there's not a whole lot of confidence there, not only from the coaches, but from the other players on offense and, honestly, the whole team. So I think that we'll see JT Shrout start on Saturday against South Carolina.
Yeah, I do too. You mentioned the quote that Pruitt gave about J.T. Shrout in an article we have on RockyTopInsider.com that was written by our contributor Robert Hughes, who you all heard on the podcast, I believe was last week. Pruitt was talking about, in the article talking about Pruitt addressing Vol fans potentially booing Garantano, which I thought he gave a very good diplomatic answer about that whole situation. The quote you're talking about is included in this article, talking about J.T. Shrout. Here's the full quote. He's excited, like anybody would be. JT is a really hard worker. He continues to develop, learning exactly how to play the position. I think Coach Winkie and Coach Chaney have done a nice job developing the young man. He continues to grow as a quarterback. We don't see it because he hasn't really had the opportunity to play that many games, but he'll get an opportunity Saturday, and we'll see where he's at. Yeah, I'm with you, Ben. Even hearing it, live when he said it, it felt like he said that. I was like, now wait a minute. That's not typical, Pruitt doesn't give I guess he doesn't give the typical quote-unquote coach speak on a lot of different stuff. When I think of coach speak, I think of stuff that the robotic Butch Jones would kind of spew out a lot of different times. But he does typically kind of sometimes answer questions and not really give you an answer, and just kind of, give you things like that where he's like, he's been doing in practice. We're kind of excited to see what he does. When he throws it in there, well, he's going to get an opportunity this weekend. I'm with you. I don't think Tennessee's going to do a dual quarterback system. The only time Tennessee's done that this season was in the UTC game. That's because it was UTC, and they could, and they wanted to and needed to get Shrout and Maurer some game experience to kind of see what those guys had, and look at them on film and stuff, because that was the first time either one of those two guys had played in a game in college, and they wanted to see, do these guys have different tendencies in games they do in practice, or are they who we think they are in practice in actual game situations? I think it was beneficial for Maurer more than Shrout, maybe, because Maurer maybe showed a little bit different stuff in that game. Obviously, he didn't. I think he only attempted 2 or 3 passes and didn't complete any. But the coaches got a chance to kind of see him run the offense a little different and a little more than what he has done in practice. Shrout, I'm going to ask you, Ben, what you kind of expect from Shrout, because that'll kind of play into a little bit of what our next conversation is going to be. We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier in the podcast this week, but now that we know that Maurer's out, that we both think it's going to be Shrout. He's a guy that has a really good arm. He could throw. He's probably got the best arm on the team, I would say, at least from just watching him practice and seeing him in games and stuff. He's got the best arm on the team, in my opinion. He can move a little bit. He's not gonna be kind of the same movement that Brian Maurer brings to the table, but also to me, he's also not maybe as much as a stature or a guy who's going to take as many hits as maybe even Garantano does. I don't know if he's a quick release type of guy. I don't know I know the offense that Pruitt described that Shrout played with in college was one that kind of threw the ball 50 or 60 times. I don't know if that was a bunch of chucking it deep and hoping for the best, or if it was a bunch of short passes. Judging by his completion percentage, I think it might have been more of the former than the latter. I think it might have been more of a, we're going to throw the ball 20, 30 yards down the field a lot, and maybe do some screens and do some stuff in the middle of the field, but maybe play sideline to sideline a lot more. I think that might have been what it was. Obviously I don't know, because I haven't seen a whole lot of his film from high school, and I didn't watch any of his games in high school. But I think he's a guy that, if you're looking for an aerial attack, from trying to get some deep passes and stuff, he could be effective there. And for the one pass we saw for him against Alabama, you mentioned it on the podcast, you've mentioned it on Swain's show. That was a good ball. That it was just a really good play by the Alabama defender to knock it down. Obviously, that was in kind of garbage time at that point. Tennessee, I guess, could have made a comeback, but they probably weren't going to. And then Alabama ended up running the clock out essentially on their next possession. That was still against an SEC defense that was really good. South Carolina has a really, really good defensive line. They have a secondary that has a lot of potential. My expectations for Shrout, Ben, are just don't turn the ball over, and that's, to me, I think the one thing he might do more than any of the quarterbacks on this roster. Maurer's had issues with interceptions. Of course, the last one against Alabama was not really his fault. That was another kind of unfortunate thing for Juwan Jennings, where he dropped the ball and it just landed right into an Alabama defender's arms. Garantano's been turnover prone this season quite a bit. But at the same time, that's one of the reasons why Shrout has not played, is because, for one, he's still kind of learning, to be a quarterback, more so than the other two, and for two, he might be the most turnover prone of the 3 quarterbacks. And like I said, Tennessee's had already quite a bit of issues with turnovers from quarterbacks this season. My thing with him is, can you create enough, or give your receivers enough of a room to make a play? Because Tennessee's receivers, they can rack up the yak. We've seen Juwan Jennings do it just by carrying guys with them. Marquez Callaway's fast enough to get by a guy. Palmer he just hasn't really been able to do that this season. You also have your running backs who are very shifty in the open field. I almost think Tennessee might be better off, kind of, if they're throwing the ball a lot, to do a similar strategy to what they did last season with, kind of have a quick passing game, pick up some chunk yards that way, use that as an extension of your run game. I just mostly don't want to. If JT Shrout starts and I'm watching the game on Saturday, the biggest thing I want from him, Ben, is just do not turn the ball over, because he's got to help Tennessee get as close to possible as they can of winning the turnover battle in this game, because that's giving this Gamecock offense, which has a really good rushing attack, giving them really good field position or favorable field position, having them constantly win the field position battle. That's just really going to hinder what Tennessee's defense, who's been playing better, but it's really going to hinder what that defense can do.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, like I said in my previous answer about who I think will start on Saturday, as long as JG or Shrout, whichever one plays, as long as they don't turn the football over, and as long as they make the correct reads and don't miss wide open receivers, and I realize it feels like that's asking a lot from JG at the moment, but my point is that if they just play clean football, Jim Chaney is not going to ask them to be Superman. I mean, he's just not. The way Tennessee's ground game is really churning right now, there's no sense in asking JG or JT to be Superman right now. It would just be silly. So they're not going to be asked to do a ton, but when they are facing a 3rd and 7, a 3rd and 8, a 3rd and long, and they need to make a play, and Chaney does put the football in their hands, and I realize that the quarterback touches the ball on every play, but when Chaney puts the ball in their court to go make a play, when Tennessee needs a play, just take what the defense gives you. Hit the open receiver. Don't turn the football over. Don't force it into double coverage, into triple coverage. Drop it off to Tim Jordan and let Tim Jordan potentially make a guy miss and get 5, 6, 7 yards. Drop it off to Ty Chandler and let him make a guy miss and get 5 to 7 yards. Nick Saban has been preaching all summer long to Tua Tagovailoa that you don't go broke turning a profit. And by him saying that, he means, yes, we have Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs and Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle and all these terrific NFL first-round wide receivers. And as sexy as it is to throw the deep ball, and yes, it's a 70-yard touchdown, and that helps the stats. But when you dump it off to the running back to pick up the first down, that keeps the defense off the field longer, gives them more of a break, more of a breather, and then obviously from an offensive perspective, you are gaining positive yards rather than an incompletion. So I think that's kind of what JT Shrout and Jarrett Garantano need to take, the mindset that they need to take into this football game, that you don't need to be Superman. JG tried to be Superman in Tuscaloosa down at the goal line, and looked how that turned out for him. He somehow surpassed Eric Ainge for the worst quarterback play in Tennessee football history. So don't be superhuman. Don't be Superman. Just try to take what the defense gives you, and if they do that and they don't turn the football over, I truly think that they will be perfectly fine, and Tennessee will have a really good chance of winning the game, assuming that the ground game continues to do what it's doing, and assuming that the defense continues to improve the way that it has week by week since the Florida game. I want to go back to our discussion earlier about who will start, because we mentioned the quote that Pruitt had about Shrout following Wednesday's practice. Well, about an hour and a half later, Pruitt spoke on Vol calls, and I thought he had a very interesting quote on Jarrett Garantano's play at Alabama. And Pruitt said that that was probably and it took me by surprise. Swain and I didn't get to it, but it took me by surprise. We caught it at the end of the show, but Pruitt said that was probably one of the better games that he's played all year. Statistically, did he miss some throws? Sure he did, but he had command. We were in the right plays. We moved the ball. to me, the whole thing about a quarterback is, do you take your team from one end and move it to the other end? He had less errors than he's had throughout the year, missed maybe one or two throws and made a bad mistake. But it's like I told him yesterday, it's one of the better games he's played. That quote might be the most influential quote that has stuck out to me from Pruitt all season. Because why would Pruitt start JT Shrout if in the mind of Pruitt, JG actually played pretty well against Alabama. He just had, one or two mistakes, and then one of the mistakes was just absolutely terrible. Why would you start Shrout if JG played an overall decent game, regardless of what the stats say? So I almost second guess, does Shrout start? Because it seems like Pruitt has really tried to back JG this week in his comments that, yes, I am frustrated with JG's play, but we still need him. That's kind of what's come across to me. He's not going to throw him under the bus, and it's been a lot of coach speak this week, such as his thoughts on JG playing against Alabama. So that makes me kind of pause and think, well, hey, what if Pruitt actually plays JG? Because if I'm Pruitt and I'm Jen Chaney, and obviously they know 1,000 times more about the situation than I do, but if I'm them and this is my thinking, I'm not starting a different quarterback if JG truly only made just one mistake, and that one mistake just happened to be the worst mistake from a quarterback in program history, So, and kind of what he's saying is what I was just pointing to, that what do I expect from JT Shrout or even Jarrett Guarantano if he plays, is exactly what Pruitt just said. He had command. We were in the right plays. We moved the ball. And as Pruitt said, to me, the whole thing about a quarterback is, do you take your team from one end and move it to the other end? JG did all those things against Alabama on Saturday, and he did it against Mississippi State. So, maybe I've just talked myself into thinking that JG plays on Saturday. But regardless of who plays, if Shrout and Guarantano follow that formula that Pruitt mentioned when describing how JG played against Alabama, in the right plays, had command, moved the ball from one side of the field to the other, then I think Tennessee will have a really good chance of winning on Saturday. It's just there's not a whole lot of confidence that A, JG can do it, and then based off practice, B, that Shrout can do it.
I know those exact quotes you're talking about. I was actually genuinely surprised on Reddit. I was like, he thought JG played the best he's probably played this season in that game, because I obviously that play on the goal line, I think, kind of really sours everything else he did in that game. And to me, it didn't seem like he was playing that great in the game to that point. He didn't play poorly. He wasn't playing the same level he did against BYU or the same way he was doing against Florida. Because we've mentioned before earlier this season when he was starting that he'd have he'd play really well in the first quarter, or even up until the second quarter. It'd be when he'd have a big mistake in the second quarter or in the second half where he would kind of fall apart. In this game, his big mistake came in the last play that he played in that game, so he didn't get a chance to see how he responded to that afterwards. I don't know, because I look at that game, he missed. Pruitt said he missed several throws. I almost look at it as if Pruitt saying that was the best game you played. That's not. It's almost like a backhanded compliment, because if that was the best game that Guarantano's played this season, what's he think about all the other performances that Guarantano's had this year? Because I genuinely think from my untrained eye and not being a coach, I thought his best game was against Mississippi State. I know obviously that touchdown pass was all a lot more on Tyler Bird than it was with Guarantano, and that was more Bird making a great play. But at the same time, the other completions that Guarantano had, they were fine passes. He only missed on one, and the other ones were placed well. And I thought his pass to Tim Jordan for that first down on third down against Mississippi State was a really good pass. And his credit, he did have some good throws on Saturday against Alabama. That drive that ultimately ended with that horrendous fumble, he made two really good throws on third down where Tennessee needed a third down conversion, and he was able to make the correct throw and the correct read to get the first down. Now, one was to Marquez Callaway, and the other one was to Tim Jordan. I think it was to Callaway on the first one, but Tennessee had two straight third down conversions that they picked up through the air because Guarantano made a good read. So those kind of throws get lost because of the things he did wrong. Most notably the fumble, and then also you look at the missed touchdown pass to Jawan Jennings, the missed throw to Tim Jordan, where Jordan had a lot of space. I think the only player he had in front of him that he would have to make a miss was a safety that was coming downhill. If it makes that guy miss, it could be a touchdown, or at minimum it's a big gain. But he just totally missed him there. And I feel like he missed a third throw that I'm struggling to remember at this point. But I get what you're saying, Ben. That quote does make you wonder, maybe he does start. But at the same time, he said the same thing about JT Shroud about, he's going to get an opportunity. I don't know. It's a thing where I don't think we're going to know it unless some kind of report comes out like last time on Saturday, I think a couple hours, or maybe just an hour before the game started, before the team went out into warm-ups. You had the report from Jimmy Hyams coming out that Maurer was going to start in that game. And then he did. And then I almost wonder if that happens. Maybe you hear something on Saturday morning or kind of early Saturday afternoon about who's going to start, because I don't think anyone's going to say anything about it beforehand. Another thing that Pruitt said, that Vols thing, Ben, that was interesting to me, was talking about Maurer's health. He essentially ruled him out for Saturday, but he also said that Maurer was talking with him, and he told Brian told Jeremy Pruitt this week, I think on earlier that day, he said on Wednesday that Maurer said he felt better today than he did at this point last week, which if I read that quote correctly, maybe he said it differently. Maybe Pruitt sometimes says things and he's kind of country, so he kind of says it the wrong way or means it a different way than what he says. Maybe he meant he's feeling better than he was earlier in the week. I don't know, but if he meant it the way it was kind of transcribed by 247 Sports, of he's feeling better than was last week, that's interesting to me that he still started last week with that. I don't know. I'm not trying to raise a ruckus or anything like that. I'm not saying that Maurer shouldn't have started, because if he was cleared by the medical staff, then
I've got
all the stuff's out of Pruitt's hands.
I've got his quote right here.
Yeah.
He was asked the question about Maurer. How is Maurer? Is what Gary in Cedar Grove, Tennessee asked him, and Pruitt said, Brian's probably not going to play this week. He'll eventually be fine. He stopped by my office on Sunday and told me he felt a whole lot better than he did the week before.
Yeah, that's weird to me. That if he's feeling better, maybe one of the callers on the Swine event came up with the idea that this is a conspiracy theory that Maurer is actually going to start. I don't know about that, but that quote was weird to me, that he said that Maurer told him he's feeling better than he was this time last week, which I don't know. It'll be interesting. I think Maurer. Before we move on to the kind of the last part of this discussion, Ben, what do you make of him going to Vanderbilt Medical? Because that to me could mean any number of things. I was interviewed earlier this week about some from a radio station over in Columbia, about that, talking about the Tennessee's quarterback situation, and I said that visit to Vanderbilt yesterday, that could mean any number of things. It could be getting a second opinion. It could be looking for maybe even some good news. It could be bad news. It could be that not only could he be missing this week, but he could be missing the rest of the season. It could be any number of things. I'm curious in your thoughts on how do you look into Maurer going over to Vanderbilt?
Absolutely nothing. I don't look into that. Pruitt kind of mentioned towards the end of his press conference on Wednesday following practice that with any player, if they feel like it's necessary, they are going to send their players to a specialist in order to offer them the best care possible. And I truly believe Pruitt when he says that. Because why? If it was something more serious, then why would he have come out on Vol calls an hour and a half later and said, "Well, Maurer stopped by my office on Sunday and said that he feels better right now than at any point at last week." So I think that tells me that it's just precautionary and that they're just trying to get the best care for the players. And I think it's smart. That's my simple take on it.
That was my take as well. I think obviously I understand fans freaking out because they like what they've seen from Maurer, and for any kid, it wouldn't just be Maurer. If it was, a Ty Chandler, Tim Jordan, or Eric Gray, any other kind of player on Tennessee's roster. I just named running backs for some reason, but they'd be concerned if any kid on Tennessee's team was going over to Vanderbilt after having repeated blows to the head over the last at least 2 weeks. I don't think he had an issue with Georgia because he came out and had a sleeve on his arm after that big hit and everything he took. And then after a couple of hits he took, and then he took that huge hit where he got strip sacked and didn't come back in the game. But he's still been beat up in all three of his starts this season, and he got I don't think he got beat up too bad, but he did get hit a couple times against Florida when he was in there for, I think, 3-4 series in that game. But the quarterback situation for Tennessee, we won't know until game time, essentially, is what I'm trying to get at. And regardless of who started, you and I both think, and we talked about earlier this week, we both think the game plan for Tennessee this weekend will probably be not asking him to throw a whole lot, more like what we saw with Mississippi State, and the fact that run the ball, and throw it kind of when you need to. But an interesting tidbit from Mike Gillespie, who I mentioned him earlier, I interviewed him from ABC Columbia about the Gamecocks in a special edition of the podcast that you can go listen to, independent of this one. But he made an interesting point that, in last week against Florida, the Gators, they've not generally been a very strong running team, and when they've ripped off, and their stats have been a little misleading because they've had 3 runs this year, I think, of 75 yards plus, and that's going to help boost their stats in 2 different games where they didn't have great numbers until all of a sudden they ripped off a huge run. It was against South Carolina. One was against I'm struggling to remember who that. I think Auburn was one where they had a big run like that, and there's another game where they had a big run that kind of busted open the stats for them in that game. But he made an interesting point that the way Florida did their damage on offense against South Carolina was actually with their passing attack and kind of exposing the Gamecocks secondary. I mean, Gamecocks have a good secondary. They just are a little young and not maybe have as much depth there as they're used to. J.C. Horn's really good, that's for sure, and they have a couple other good guys there. But that front 7 is really good, especially with the defensive line. He made an interesting point to me that he believes if Tennessee gets into, whatever you want to call it, kind of a rock fight or a kind of muddy it out and just kind of both teams kind of, pound the ground and win the game that way, he thinks that benefits South Carolina more. And Ben, that goes in direct contrast of what you and I were saying earlier this week we think Tennessee should do. I mean, and the stats kind of back him up. South Carolina's passing defense has been not very good this year. They're giving up 250 yards per game through the air. They've allowed 15 touchdowns. They have picked off 9 passes, which half those it feels like came against Georgia. They had 3 against Georgia and 3 against Charleston Southern. But Florida, like I said, they were pretty efficient against them. 4 touchdown passes, the 1 interception, 200 passing yards, and that was in a very kind of rainy game, which we could have again this weekend in Knoxville. But you had Kentucky. I don't really count that game because that was when I think Cyrus Smith or Lynn Bowden both were playing in that game. Maybe that was just Kentucky's not had a good offense this year. Missouri passed for 230 2 touchdowns. Alabama 500 yards of passing just about and 5 touchdowns. North Carolina 245 yards and 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. So this is a team that has had issues guarding the pass. Meanwhile, they haven't been great stopping the run, but they're 9th in the SEC in run defense. They're right ahead of Tennessee. These two teams are very similar statistical and rushing defense. 146 yards allowed, only 4 rushing touchdowns, 4 yards per carry on the rushing defense. The rushing offense has been very good. They're number 4 in the SEC, just under 200 rushing yards per game, 15 touchdowns, 5.6 yards per carry. Of course, I think we mentioned this earlier, but you're not going to have Rico Dowdle in there, but you do still have Tavian Feaster, the Clemson transfer, who's very good, who just put up some huge numbers last week. I think Mondenson is a pretty good backup. He's proven to be kind of a complementary back to what Tavian Feaster can do, and I think Denson's going to be a guy who will get some carries and pick up some chunk yards for South Carolina in this game. But I'm interested in having a discussion with you, Ben, because like I said, this goes completely against what we said earlier this week, that we think Tennessee should implement the Mississippi State kind of strategy. Does this change kind of how you feel about that? Do you think Tennessee should still stick with, hey, we don't trust our quarterbacks a whole lot and we're just going to kind of try to run the ball 40 times? Or does Tennessee need to air it out a little bit? And I'm not saying that they need to go throw the ball 40, 50 times, but do they need to air it out a little bit more, try to do maybe what they did last year against South Carolina? Because that was the offense wasn't the reason the Vols lost that game last season. It was the defense. I thought the offensive game plan was probably the best one that Tyson Helton drew up last year. I mean, because you can say the Auburn game, that was definitely, I think, more of a throw it up and make your receivers make a play. But I thought as far as actual game planning and execution of the game plan, I thought the South Carolina game was really well done as far as hitting some shorter, quick passes and using that almost as an extension of your run game and then letting your receivers kind of pick up some yards that way. Because there's several times where they threw it over to the sideline just in front of the line of scrimmage to Callaway, and Callaway would burst forward and get 7, 8, 9, 10 yards on a almost on a run for him. I almost think they should maybe do that, but I'm curious what your thoughts are, because this goes in direct contrast of what we both talked about earlier this week.
No, I get what he's saying, but unfortunately Tennessee is not equipped at the moment to take advantage of South Carolina's weaknesses, if that's what you want to call them. I wouldn't necessarily say that they are weak. It is the weakest, area of the defense. I get that South Carolina, is very successful at running the football, and I agree with you. Even though Rico Dowdle is out, Tavion Feaster and the backup there is more than enough to create some problems for a Tennessee defense that has played better of late. But at least for me, I still don't have full confidence that that they'll be great against a good rushing defense. I mean, even against Georgia and this past weekend against Alabama, they had a wild success running the football. Really, Mississippi State is the only example we have this year of teams not being super successful running the football. I believe kind of at this point in the season, I'm getting my games mixed up, but I don't recall BYU being super successful on the ground either. But my point being is that there's not a lot of examples, a lot of tape of Tennessee just being great against the run. So, maybe it is the case that Tennessee wants to really force Ryan Hilinski to throw the football. But, and again, maybe this is just a me thing, but Ryan Hilinski scares me too, especially if he's not playing like a true freshman. And he's the quarterback that showed up against Alabama. I think Tennessee will have some problems because, again, Tennessee secondary has improved, but it's still not a great secondary, if that makes sense. So if I'm Tennessee, I'm still trying to follow the Mississippi State game plan because, again, Tennessee isn't equipped to do anything else other than that, in my opinion. I think you just have to hope that Trey Smith, Brandon Kennedy, Wanye Morris, Darnell Wright, and Jerome Carvin, that group of guys who have really improved from week to week. Trey Smith is playing his best football at the moment. Brandon Kennedy has finally knocked the rust off of his injuries. Wanye Morris and Darnell Wright are starting to play more like sophomores than freshmen. Jerome Carvin, Kayron Calvert, those guys are starting to come into their own. I think you just have to, although you may not feel good about it going in, I think you just have to try to find some faith that they can get the job done on the ground and follow that same game plan that you did in the second half of the Mississippi State game because of the quarterback situation. You just simply can't put the ball in JG's or in JT's hands at the moment to win you football games. They need to come in. They need to take care of the football, take what the defense gives them. Jim Chaney needs to put them in easy situations to manage, and you have to get the ground game going. And although I don't have a ton of confidence in the defense, I do think that they can play well enough to win. So if I'm Tennessee, I'm banking on the run, get the run game going, play bend but don't break defense, and then make a big play or two in the passing game with Juwan Jennings, with Marquez Callaway, and win special teams as they usually do. Allow Brent Zamaglia to have a good day. Kick it through the end zone. Don't allow South Carolina a chance at any returns. Make sure your punt coverage is solid. Make sure you are winning the field position game with Joe Doyle or Paxton Brooks, whoever is punting the football. That's Tennessee's road to success. Unfortunately, Tennessee isn't just equipped from a quarterback standpoint, and I think even a defensive standpoint to really, pick what they're going to shut down. Because I still, yes, again, they have improved. They have gotten better. But South Carolina has playmakers that can really hurt them. Talking about South Carolina's offensive players, Brian Edwards, Tavion Feaster. I really like Ryan Hilinski. They have a good offensive line, as you mentioned, Nathaniel. Tennessee's defense, outside of Mississippi State, hasn't played all that well this season. So I don't have a ton of faith in them to slow them down. But, again, play bend but don't break defense and then get the running game going. And I think that's still the key to success in this game.
Ryan Hilinski, I'm with you a little bit on him. He has been banged up lately, and he's not played at the same level. You mentioned his Alabama performance. That was a good game for him. 324 yards, 2 touchdowns, interception in that game. Came back against Missouri, did not play well at all in that game. Only completed 43% of his passes, a touchdown and interception in that one. Kentucky didn't play great, 55% completion percentage, 140 yards, no touchdowns. Against Georgia, he played well enough to win. He was 15 of 20. They didn't ask him to do a whole lot in that game, and then he also got hurt. But he was 15 of 20, 116 yards and a touchdown in that game. I think against Florida last week, less than 50% of his passes completed again, 48.5%, 170 yards, a touchdown, no interceptions. But that was a game I remember hearing, I don't remember his name, but he covers South Carolina for The Athletic. He said that was actually a game where he thought Helinski's play for the first time this season was a big reason why South Carolina lost a game this year. He felt like that was a game that Helinski just was missing guys. He was not playing very well at all in that game. So I'm curious to see what kind of player Helinski will be this weekend. Is he going to be, like you said, will he kind of get healthier? Will he play more up to what he did against Alabama or even what he was doing against Georgia? Or is he still just too banged up and he's not healthy enough to be the kind of difference maker that he's been at different points in this season? Because he was not very good against Florida, and South Carolina very much had a chance to win that game, and they very much have a reason, just like Tennessee fans do, to be upset with the officials from that game. Both of these coaches come into this game pretty pissed off about the officiating from their previous game. Pruitt talking about he was trying to move on from it. He asked another question about it, Vol calls, and I thought his interaction with Bob Kessling about that was funny. He just essentially was asking Kessling if he believed what Kessling was saying about descriptions of that play, about where the officials stopped the play for Tennessee when they had a trick play ready to go and never gave anybody an explanation of why. So this game to me, Ben, we talked about just then, I don't know that Tennessee is able to, at just this point with Brian Maurer being out, if they're actually going to be able to take advantage of kind of the bigger weaknesses that South Carolina has. And that kind of makes me feel a little different about this game. You and I both I think you and I both were split about Mississippi State before that game and the week leading up to it. You and I both have been split about this game in the opposite direction. I thought for a long time that Tennessee was going to lose to Mississippi State. You thought for a long time Tennessee was going to beat them. I think actually when it came time to do predictions, we both picked Tennessee to lose that game, and then we both were wrong. For the longest time, I've thought Tennessee was going to be able to beat South Carolina. For the longest time, you thought Tennessee was going to lose to South Carolina. We'll have a prediction, so I don't want to spoil it too much. But if your gut feeling right now, just knowing what we know, we don't know the starting quarterback. We don't know how beat up Helinski is. We don't know just a couple different things. What the weather's going to be like. What is your gut feeling as far as just your feel for the game? Because I think it's going to be. I think it could be very similar to what we saw in that 2017 contest, that 15-9 game where I don't know that either team really gets to 20 points in this game potentially. And that you saw that in Georgia went to double overtime, and it took South Carolina that long to get to 20 points in that game. I think this could be another game where if either team gets to 20 points, that's going to be who wins this game. I think it's just going to be kind of an ugly defensive struggle with whoever runs the ball best ends up probably winning the game.
No, I'm with you. I tend to think that South Carolina wins this football game partly because Will Muschamp has Tennessee's number. His team is going to be ready to play, and Tennessee, yes, they continue to improve. I know I keep saying that, and it's true. They continue to improve, and this team is totally different than the one that lost to Georgia State to begin the season. But even though that the team has gotten better, they still have weaknesses. And I'm afraid that the Mississippi State game was a flash in the pan, because look how Mississippi State has turned out. They're not a very good team. They're not as good as we thought they were at the time, or at least a week or two before that Mississippi State-Tennessee game. So I am a little bit worried about that game, that win over Mississippi State, not necessarily ringing true to what this defense is. And it's more so with the defense that I have my concerns. Obviously, I do have my concerns with the quarterback position if Brian Maurer isn't playing. But in regards to replicating that success in the Mississippi State game, I'm having a hard time believing that same defensive performance, stopping the run, picking off 3 passes, good coverage downfield. I still have concerns about that being consistent from here on out. And I may be completely wrong about that, but, South Carolina presents those same challenges, but they're even better at those positions. If Ryan Helinski plays like he did against Alabama and doesn't play like he has when he's been banged up, which who knows which quarterback we will get, but if we get the best Ryan Helinski, I think that's going to be a big-time problem for Tennessee secondary that, the guys are still open running around in the secondary. So that's a concern. I'm still concerned about Tennessee's pass rush. They've had a couple sacks here and there, but if you go back and watch the Mississippi State game, most of those sacks were covered sacks. The Garrett Strader and Tommy Stevens, although they were sacked on the play, had 3 to 4 to 5 seconds to throw the football, and anything over 3 seconds is not good from a defensive standpoint. So that is still a concern of mine, generating a pass rush, being able to defend Bryson Edwards, defend the receivers long enough for the defensive line to get to Helinski. And then on top of all that, stopping the run. I mean, Henry To'oTo'o and Daniel Batuli still have to play every snap, and that is a concern. I like Kavarius Crouch, but he's essentially all Tennessee has at that position after To'oTo'o, after Batuli. So a lot of my concerns for this game resides on the defensive side of the ball for Tennessee, and that, and then the quarterback situation for Tennessee. I just don't have a lot of faith in it right now. It's hard to have any faith in Jared Garantano at the moment, and I'm the type of person that you have to really prove it to me before I believe in you, and that's kind of where I'm at with JT Shrout. He has a big arm, but I do have concerns about him being able to set the offense up in successful situations. So between the quarterback situation that Tennessee has going on and some defensive concerns that I still have, and I may be proven wrong, and I hope that I am, but I kind of lean towards South Carolina winning this football game. But I do agree with you, especially if the weather is bad. I think it'll be a sloppy game, and I think probably the team that is first to 24, 27, 28 points, somewhere in there, mid-20s to high 20s, first team in that range from an offensive perspective, I think wins this football game.
Yeah, I think it's a very good assessment. It's a game that I would feel a lot differently about if Brian Maurer were healthy. I think that's kind of stating the obvious, but I definitely would. And it's just a situation where South Carolina could be catching Tennessee at the right time, but at the same time, though, maybe this role's reversed. There's been plenty of times where it looked like Tennessee should be able to kind of handle South Carolina easily. And not that I think South Carolina should be able to handle Tennessee easily, but I'm saying that there's been a couple of times over the last couple of years where it seems like Tennessee should have the upper hand against South Carolina, and then lo and behold, it's either a really close game or, a la 2016, South Carolina wins that game with a true freshman quarterback at Jake Bentley. Look back at the 2015 season too. Tennessee should have been able to beat that South Carolina team better and more than what they did. But Sean Elliott, give kudos to him. He coached that team up and got them fired up, ready to go for that game, and that was a very close one. This series has been ridiculously close. The last 7 contests have been decided by less than a touchdown, and most of those, except for the 2017 game, which was a 6-point win by South Carolina, all the other ones have been 3 points or less in terms of the margin of victory by either whoever wins it. I don't expect that one. I don't expect that to change this weekend. I think this will be a game that's decided by one possession, whether it's 7-point win, 6-point win, 1-point win. I think you're going to have somewhere in that range. If either team wins by more than by 2 scores or more, I would be pretty shocked. To me, I think the only way that happens is if there's just a very late kind of ice in the game touchdown with like 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter or something like that. Otherwise, I truly think this game is going to be just like all the other ones have almost the last decade. Very close, and both teams, or whoever has the ball last, is going to have a chance to win the game. Tennessee hasn't been able to do that the last 2 years. They had the chance to go down in the final couple minutes of both games over the last 2 seasons and win, and they haven't been able to do it. Last time was in Neyland. Fans had to watch a pass from Garantano to, I think it was Brandon Johnson, get dropped in the end zone, and Tennessee's hopes crash down after that one for getting any SEC wins that season. And then you also had, Garantano showing the emotion after the game, Jake Bentley going up and kind of picking him up and everything too. So I don't know, Ben. I don't know kind of how the game's going to go. but I do feel really good about saying that it's going to be close and that it's going to be kind of. I think I feel pretty good about saying it's going to be an ugly game too, because I just, with the weather, the way that could be setting up, I just don't think you're going to see a 30. Either one of these teams get to 30 points or something like that, but. We'll have all kind of coverage for you. Ben will be there at the game in Neyland Stadium. Now we'll have all kinds of coverage for you leading up to it. This podcast, the interview with Mike Gillespie. We'll have an opponent preview on Thursday on the site coming out that Ben will be doing. We'll have our prediction panel. We'll also have maybe another by the numbers look. We also have our buy or sell piece will come up as well. Just a couple different things for the game. And of course, if JT Shrout does start, we'll talk about his first career start. If Garantano starts, we'll talk about how that goes for him and for Tennessee, but we'll have all kinds of coverage leading up to the game, and then we'll have a post-game show for you after the game, and then tons of analysis and takeaways from the game itself. But we appreciate you all tuning in to this episode of the podcast. I mentioned earlier all the places you can listen to it. We thank you so much for every single week interacting with us and listening to the podcast and reading our stuff on the site. You guys are awesome, and you're the reason why we do what we do. But until next time, this has been another episode of the RTI Podcast.